Welcome back. In this episode, we're going to discuss that midlife crisis and whether or not you can transition from a career that you've had for some years and move into a career in sports broadcasting. It's a very delicate topic. It's one that I've talked about with people one-on-one for many years. And today we're going to talk about that. So let's talk about your midlife crisis. Let's talk about making a career change, and let's play some pool. So I thought this would be a pretty cool idea. Hey, Oliver. Hey, buddy. It's my buddy Oliver right here. You can see him. He's a good boy. He's a good boy. Needs some dental surgery, actually, but that's a topic for another day. Let's talk about making that switch midlife. If you're in banking, you're a teacher, you're working at a cubicle, have you ever thought about switching to a career in sports broadcasting? Let's talk about that. But first, got a break? Let's see what I can do here. All right, so first we're going to talk about, can you make the transition? Can you make that change? Second, we're going to talk about some considerations you're going to have to think about as you make that change. And third, I'm going to give you my conclusion. Okay, so we're going to do all three parts because I want to explain to you some of the things you're going to have to consider when you're talking about making a switch midlife to become a sports broadcaster. Now, the whole idea for this question was Courtney and I were watching a pretty cool show lately. It's called Severance. You've probably watched it. It's a show on Apple TV, actually. And Courtney and I are watching this show, and these people are midlife, all right? And they're midlife, and they're going through a change in careers. I'm not going to give away any more than that because I don't want to ruin the show for you. And it really made me think about that question that I've been asked many times. When I was, that's not good. When I was teaching at the Connecticut School of Broadcasting, I remember doing an all-day seminar. It started, I think, 9 a.m. and went till like 4 p.m. We had a break for lunch, and I had an array of aspiring sportscasters there. There were young students in high school. That was probably the majority. Let's say 16-year-old boys. That made up a big chunk of it. But out of about 20 students that were there, there was this one gentleman. I still remember him. And boy, I blew that one. And he was mid-career. He was probably my age now. He was late 40s. And during the first break in the morning, he came over to me and he said, "Rick, I'm here at this class because my son wanted to come, but I've been really considering making a switch to sports broadcasting." I think he was in some kind of business career. He didn't love it. He said, "I'm a huge sports fan." That's usually what I'll hear a lot. I'll hear people say, "I'm a big sports fan. That's all I think about. And I've always considered, what if that were my career?" So he said, "Can we talk more about this?" And I said, "Yes." I said, "Let's do that." So I started out with him the same way I'm going to start out with you. I said, there are some things you need to consider if you're going to become a sports broadcaster mid-career. The first thing I wanted to answer for him was what I'm answering for you. Is it possible? And the answer to that is yes, it is possible. It's definitely possible. Some of you, if you're in the New York area, you might know about Joe Beningo. He was a huge sports fan and a caller to WFAN radio. They ran a contest. He won the contest, and then he became a host at WFAN, and a really, really strong one overnight. Eventually moved up to become one of their big players throughout the day. So, yes, it is possible. It is possible to change mid-career. Obviously, you're going to need to have a few things if you're going to do that. Number one, you're going to need a strong knowledge, obviously, of the material, sports. Okay, that goes without saying. This will be a pretty good shot if I can make it. No, didn't have the ability to do that. So you've got to know sports. That's number one. Number two, you've got to have the time. And that brings me to the second part of this whole story. Number one, as I said, can I do it? Yes. Number two, what will I encounter? Okay, here are some of the things you're going to encounter. You're going to come across young people, men and women, who went to school to be in sports journalism, sports broadcasting, and that's their complete and total focus. If you are in the middle of your career and you're working at a cubicle somewhere, you're in administration, you're a teacher, you're a garbage man, I don't care what your profession is, but chances are, if you're in sales, chances are you've had to spend a lot of time devoted to that profession. And while you've been doing that, this up-and-coming student or all of the students that you're competing with for jobs, they've been focusing on sports. So that's one thing I definitely see when midlife people like myself try to make a transition into sports broadcasting, is they may not be devoting the time to following all of the different sports and the different teams and the different players as opposed to someone who's younger. And I know that's the case for me. As you get older, come on, Rick, hit that a little harder. Life takes over. And so as life takes over, your priorities change. You have kids. So that's one challenge you're going to face. Okay, that's a big one. Another challenge you're going to face if you try to make the transition mid-career is you've got to be ready for little or no pay. And that's sometimes a hard one for people to swallow, because a lot of people think everyone in sports broadcasting makes a ton of money because you're on TV, you're on the radio. But that's really, I like to use the 80-20 rule. That's really the 20% you see, but the 80%, it's probably more like 90-10, because 90% of the people you don't see aren't making much money. The 10%, they're the ones you do see. And so you've got to be prepared financially to not make a lot of money. I mean, it's as simple as that if you want to make that career change. Number two, here's another thing you need to consider if you're looking to make a career change to sports in midlife. If you're having this midlife crisis, it's funny, some people go get a sports car, other people start a YouTube channel, and some people, they decide to go into sports broadcasting as a midlife crisis. But if you try to do that, you've got to realize it's a time commitment, and especially in terms of the variability of the time. You may be used to working a 9-to-5, which is great, but in sports media, it's a lot of evenings and weekends. A lot of evenings and weekends. Because think about it, that's when the games are happening. They're happening in the evening, they're happening at any weekend hour. And honestly, when I was 18, 20, 25, that was great because that was my focus. That was my entire focus of my life. And I could devote it to that. So I remember traveling down to New York City on Christmas Day to work behind the scenes at NBC Sports NFL production because I was going to Fordham University. They needed someone. I knew someone. He called me Christmas morning and said, "Hey, Rick, I know this is strange, but would you like to work at NBC in the NFL department today?" Of course I did. So I hopped on a train, got my rear end down to New York City. I can also remember broadcasting college, or not college, but high school football games. Ironically, with Kevin Burkhardt back in 1997 or 96, we did about 2 years together, basketball and football. And we did Thanksgiving Day football games in northern New Jersey. And so that was a sacrifice that I was happy to make at that time because I wanted to be on the air, I wanted to broadcast, I wanted to practice and get better. And so evenings, weekends, holidays, those are big sacrifices you're going to have to make. So those are two considerations. And here's a third one. If you're looking to make that change midlife, you have to understand that you may have to start at a lower rung. So even though you might be 50 years old and you look at some whippersnapper who's just out of college, but maybe they've been doing it a while, and you're the low man on the totem pole or low woman on the totem pole. So you may have to start at a lower rung, doing some grunt work, doing stats, doing behind the scenes work. And for a lot of people, that's a tough pill to swallow. Those are things that when you're younger, you're just starting out, no problem. But then as you get older, sometimes it's a little frustrating to start at the lower rung. So you've got to be prepared for that also. So we've already established that yes, you can make the change. Number two, some of the considerations you have to take into mind are the time commitment, the financial commitment, being the low man on the totem pole. All those things play into it. I think the money part of it is the biggest one, because chances are you're not going to make a lot of money right away if you decide to move into sports media as a midlife jump, changing careers. So that's probably the biggest one. So here's my conclusion on the matter. Can you make the change? Yes. Yes, you can make the change. I do know people that have done it. But here's what I think is ideal. 8-ball corner pocket. I think it would be ideal if I make this shot. Nice. I think it would be ideal if you spent your years planning it out. Maybe you start a YouTube show. Maybe you start doing some things, volunteering on the side, dipping your toe in the water. Because then if you want to make a change, you've got your financial house in order. If you had that, if money was not an object, and you're 50 years old, you're 60 years old, go for it. You live once. You live once. You've got to enjoy yourself. And I'm obviously saying that you've got to take care of your family obligations, your children, any of those things that an adult has to do. Those should come first. But can you make that change later, down the road? That would be my advice. Dip your toe in the water as you're working. Start part-time. Don't give up your full-time career right away, but rather continue your full-time career and maybe get a job at a local radio station or with a local team. So you can dip your toe in the water. You're not, what's the analogy Dave Ramsey uses, that you don't want to jump off the boat until you're close enough to the dock. And I think that's what you want to do in this scenario. You want to make sure all your ducks are in a row before you jump. And you can do that part-time. So that would be my suggestion to anyone having this midlife crisis, considering jumping into the sports broadcasting game. I would say try it out part-time before you make a change. Don't go into work and quit and say, I'm going to become a sports broadcaster. Don't do that. Don't do that. Please. Please don't do that. Start part-time. Get a feel for it that way, because you may decide it's not what you thought it was going to be. It's not something you enjoy. You couldn't see yourself doing that every day. I have seen people get into this business and say, you know what, I used to be a huge sports fan, but once I started working in it, it took a lot of the fun away. So they wanted to go back to being a fan and doing that for fun. On the weekends, doing that for fun so they could enjoy it and still maintaining their full-time career doing whatever else. So that would be my ultimate suggestion. Dip your toe in, do it part-time. If you have any comments, anything you think I left out, please leave them here. Obviously, subscribe so you can get a lot of our information, a lot of our career advice, a lot of our sports media advice. So subscribe to the channel, but leave a comment. And if you want to ask me any specific questions, leave it down below, because I look at all the comments. And if you have questions, I'll answer them and try to steer you in the right way. It's not financial advice, as you hear on all the YouTube shows, but that would be my advice for you today. Hope this was fun. I'm glad you enjoyed playing pool with me, and we'll see you next time. So long.